So, Kathleen, one of the questions I had about your presentation, you said that the thing that moved you most about the argument that was strongest for you against BDS was the idea that it means giving up on Israel. And so what I'd like to know is what you say about the Israeli left, what I would call the true Israeli left, which is smaller than I wish it was, but actually is several hundred people, if not a couple thousand people, who are calling for boycott, and they're calling for full boycott in solidarity with the Palestinian call. So how is that giving up on Israel? Those are people living in Israel who are committed to being in Israel and staying in Israel. And I think, just a little comment I'd make about that is that the end of apartheid in South Africa didn't mean the end of South Africa, and it didn't mean giving up on South Africa. It meant creating an end to unjust practices. So if I could just do my second half, and then I'll, do good, okay. And then,
so you're getting two questions.
Is that good? Okay. Yeah. And then my question for you, Bill, was that how would you propose to get the U.S. to change its policies? I don't know how you encounter not only AIPAC, but the military-industrial complex and the Christian Zionist lobby, and just the idea that the U.S. could change its policy and Obama would change his policy magically when there isn't that pressure to do so, and in fact there's very strong forces that are pushing you to continue that way, and that Obama at least has not shown any inclination to change his policies, in fact to sort of roll over, and that all the presidents before him have done the same. How do you think that would happen?
There are certainly a handful of activists in Israel who support BDS. I frankly don't know how you can support boycotting Israel when you're in Israel. You're using the roads and you're drinking the water and you're buying the products, but undoubtedly there are a handful of people who do support it. The left, that is the real left, and not big enough but growing in Israel, is a left that doesn't support BDS, and in fact regards it as a real diversion. The left that doesn't support BDS are the people who demonstrate at Sheikh Jarrah. They're the NGOs that are supported by the New Israel Fund. They're ACRI, they're the Israel Women's Network, they're Midrashah. There's lots of progressive activists who do not support BDS. And I might also add that this movement is a gift to the right-wing American Jewish establishment. It has allowed the right-wing, or the mainstream American Jewish establishment to have this ferocious reaction, to organize, to spend money, all of which changes the subject. They're having the best time, and with arguments like Hannah's, they really can make lots of points. Hannah really doesn't care if Israel continues to exist. The American Jewish establishment has a party with that. And I'm very sad that the subject has been changed from occupation and peace and justice to BDS.
Rebecca, with all due respect, I'm not sure you were listening to what I said, because I did answer your question in the course of my remarks, but I will be glad to repeat it. I believe that if the President of the United States lays on the table an agreement based on the kinds of compromises from both sides that were represented in the Geneva Accords and in the ILO Nusayba agreements and in the Clinton parameters, that people will recognize that this is a fair, just, and equitable solution, and that any party, either party, which resists that will lose support. That most people support the end of the occupation, they support equitable, they support that the basic demands of both sides will be met. And I think this will undermine the AIPACs and the other organizations which claim Israel, right or wrong, that Israel can do no wrong, and it's only the other side that's not a partner for peace. I think specifically if the Palestinians embrace those principles, it will really single out the Israelis as being the recalcitrant party. And I think this will embolden the President and his administration. It will hopefully strengthen organizations like J Street and Americans for Peace Now and others who want to see the United States take a forceful role. And I believe, more importantly, or equally importantly, that once Israelis begin to see that a public opinion, Jewish opinion in particular in the United States, is beginning to shift, they will reevaluate their own positions, and that the right in Israel will begin to lose its effectiveness, and that gradually public opinion in Israel will turn around to accept a two-state solution. Does that answer your question?
I'd like to ask both of you whether, have each of you say whether or not you think that a democratic Jewish state of Israel is possible. I think you've already answered, Hannah, but...
That was going to be my question to you,
Yeah.
too.
You know, I think it depends how you define a Jewish state. If a Jewish state means a Jewish state where Jewish citizens have more rights than non-Jewish citizens, then no, that's not a Jewish democratic state. If a Jewish state, if Israel, let's not call it, I mean, it's a country that is called Israel, right? It's not a Jewish state, it's a country called Israel that exists. And in it, there's 20% of the population that is not Jewish, and they do not have equal rights. To me, the idea of the Jewishness trumping the rights of that minority to live fully equal lives, both as individuals and as a community, no, that doesn't trump, cannot trump the other. I hope that there is a way to create something out of the entire situation where people's communal rights, religious rights are respected, but if I had to choose between the idea of some people not being able to have full rights in order to maintain a Jewish state, then no, I personally, and in this case very much speaking for personally, not on behalf of my organization, I can't support that.
Well, I think I did already answer it in mine, but I was going to ask both of you to explain a little bit more about what you mean when you say a Jewish democratic state. What does that look like for you? And if you can addressing all groups of Palestinian people, unless you're only talking about rights for part of the Palestinian people. But if you're talking about all Palestinian people, what does that look like for you? And maybe I can add a question onto there that's related to that, I think, Gil, something that you said. You said kind of casually that everyone knows that Palestinians are going to have to relinquish the right of return. And I'm wondering who this everyone is. And I mean, with that statement, you're writing off a basic right that applies to all people in the world, not only Palestinians, but a basic right of the majority of Palestinian people. And so what I'm wondering is, when you say a majority, and you said a majority of people on both sides know this and will accept this, I'm wondering if you're including the majority of Palestinian people, if you're including refugees or not, and if you think that refugees will also agree with that, or if you're excluding refugees from this when you say the majority.
On a democratic Jewish state of Israel, I support, and I'm appalled by the lack of full citizenship rights for all Palestinians within the state of Israel. I support the rights of Palestinian Israeli citizens to be equal citizens. According to the Declaration of Independence of Israel, they are equal citizens, but we know that that is not the reality, that there's a great deal of discrimination against Arabs in Israel, and it's grounded in the fact that they're not Jewish. It's grounded in the fact that most of them don't serve in the army. I'm appalled, I'm ashamed, and the democratic Jewish state of Israel that I support doesn't do that. The Jewishness of the Jewish state of Israel to me is like the Frenchness of the state of France. It's not privileging a religion, it's declaring an ethnicity, and that ethnicity should be available to everybody. That's the democratic Jewish state of Israel. It's like people who are atheists. God with a white beard and living in heaven. Well, the God you don't believe in is the God I don't believe in. The anti-democratic state of Israel that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. But I think it's possible that can change.
Let me just quote to you from the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel on the question of what sort of Jewish state they envisaged. The state of Israel will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all of its people. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Now, we all know that that ideal has not been achieved, and in fact, with the passage of every year, I'm afraid Israel is moving further rather than closer to achieving that objective. I happen to believe that it is still possible. I still happen to believe that there can be a Jewish state which accords full rights to its non-Jewish citizens. There's nothing inherent about a Jewish state which requires discrimination against non-Jews. I think much of the discrimination that takes place emanates from the security situation, or the perceived security situation, the perception that the Arabs are somehow an enemy, that they support the enemies of Israel. I think once a peace agreement is achieved, much of that will go away. I don't deceive myself into thinking that all racism in Israel is going to disappear, but I think the possibility of achieving the ideals as stated in this Declaration of Independence will be much more feasible once there is peace between Israel and Palestine. Now, to answer Hannah's other question, what was your other question?
You said a majority of people would be willing to.
Right. What I meant to say was that the people who are in the position to make decisions, the people with whom Israel is negotiating, I do believe recognize that. Because otherwise, there's simply no possibility of reaching a peace agreement. There's no possibility that Israel, under any circumstances, under any government, would agree to the repatriation of 6 million Palestinians to Palestine. And you know that as well as to Israel. You know that as well as I do, Hannah. That is simply a code word for saying the state of Israel should disappear. And I think that Abu Mazen and Fatah, and for that matter, to tell you the truth, Hamas, recognize that in the final analysis, the Palestinians are going to have to give up that right. I know it's going to be a terribly wrenching, just emotionally painful decision, just as it has been for a lot of people in Israel to be giving up the settlements in the territories. Both sides are going to have to make very, very painful compromises. But if there's any prospect of peace, BDS or no BDS, implementing the right of return of 6 million Palestinians to Israel is simply a non-starter.
Hold that for a second. I'm wondering, Bill, do you have a question that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I was struck by one thing that Rebecca said, suggesting somehow that BDS would bring the U.S. government to change its policies towards Israel. I don't quite understand how you think that would come about. Why would BDS influence the U.S. government in that direction?
Well, it goes very much to the question I asked you, because I think the question I asked you was not about a policy prescription. It was really a question about politics and power, and who has the power in this country, and why political decisions happen the way they do. And I think that no matter how good a policy prescription is out there, that right now the power is with people who are very interested in maintaining the status quo and are pretty much acting on Israel's behalf in terms of negotiations. And so what the BDS movement can do is that, and I think this also goes back to the question about economic impact or as opposed to symbolic impact. I mean, I think it's actually now having both, for example, what happened recently with Lev Leviat in Africa, Israel, and stopping and building the settlements. But it obviously very much has to do with symbolic impact, and it also has to do with BDS as an educational tool. And I think in the United States, where we're very much at the beginning, that BDS is very much an educational tool for people to start to learn about what the real situation is after many, many years of a lot of misinformation out there. And so as this movement builds, and it really is building in this sort of litany of successes, which have had relatively small economic impact, but do have big symbolic impact, as that movement builds, eventually, I think Congress will be the last to move, and that was very much the case in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, that movement eventually will filter down to Congress and to the president, that they will be the last to move, that they don't right now don't have the ability to change their policies because they'll get creamed, because the political power and the power of money means that their policies are being supported. So it's really only a movement of people which will grow through the BDS movement and is growing through the BDS movement that will eventually have those policies